A very warm welcome to members of Indian Environment Network. If you are not a member, so join us today. And I'm so very happy to have with me Dr. Amit Lahiri, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of O.P. Jindal Global University. Dr. Lahiri, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Chandra. It's such a pleasure to be hosted by the Paryavaran Environmental Professionals Network this morning.
I'm so very happy to have you. And as you know, the mission of our network is to celebrate the life stories of real and dedicated grassroots professionals like you, whose ideas can change the world. So let us share your story today, Amit. And I always start with this question, which is very relevant. Who is Amit Lahiri? Rome was not built in a day, right?
That's right. So I'm Chandra. I'm a simple person, just like all of us, trying to do a job in as dedicated a manner as possible. So who is Amit Lahiri? It's a very fundamental philosophical question that you ask. I wish, like they say in Hindu philosophy, you start off with an analysis, a discovery of your Atman. Of who you are. I wish I knew the answer.
Let's start from your childhood days. Like, what did you do, and what did you aspire to become, and did you land in the right position after that?
That's much more in my grips.
Exactly.
So, as long as my memory cells are functioning, So I was born to a family with a scientist father, doing quite pioneering work for the Indian industrial and the fuel research space.
Oh, wow.
My father was a member of the Planning Commission in the 1970s and the 80s. Then he joined, after being in the United Nations, a senior scientist with the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR. He was mandated in opening the first series of coal survey laboratories all across the country.
Okay.
We started that off in the largely sort of mining areas where there's a lot of coal. And, India's industrial development needed coal. And so he was in charge of certifying that the coal was correct for industrial usage. So he started his career in what is now Chhattisgarh,
okay,
in Bilaspur. But that particular point in time in the 1950s, when he started his career, it was Bilaspur, it was Madhya Pradesh.
Yeah.
And he started off absolutely, in the middle of the jungles, starting off with a laboratory.
Wow.
Center of national eminence. And the garden that he created in that laboratory is still named after him, called Kanak Vihar. And then he moved on to another tribal area, mining area, in the Jharkhand, which is now Jharkhand, but it's Ranchi. And that is where I was born, when he was setting up his second fuel research institute in the country. And so I grew up in Ranchi. I grew up with a scientist's father, as I've just been telling you, and with a mother who was trained in Rabindranath's Bengali literature from Calcutta.
Yes.
It was a kind of a dual confluence of literature, philosophy, science
Mm-hmm.
being sort of discussed over dinners at
Mm-hmm.
home, and books being read, being ideas being discussed, and me and my sister, we grew up in that influence. And Ranchi was, being a sort of small town in the Chotanagpur plateau, near so many falls, so many rivers. It was an absolutely beautiful environment. In fact, my grandmother lived in Hazaribagh in a neighboring town, and we used to go down and meet her. And so that was essentially the kind of environment, geographically and physically, that I grew up in. My father was an organic gardener as well.
Oh,
So it was
wow.
fabulous to see so much of organic produce. And at that particular point in time, I didn't appreciate. But now that I look back on my father's life and as a person, and my mother was a brilliant cook, in
Oh,
addition to being,
goodness.
so therefore, all that fresh produce, the fruits, the vegetables, the green chilies, the
Yeah,
various, all that came out from the garden, the bungalow that I was living. Uh,
right.
my mother used to handcraft that into the most sort of delicious. I think that's perhaps why, even in the age of COVID, I can
Yeah.
boast of perhaps whatever little immunity I have,
Uh-huh.
because of that, because of those growing up years, and
No,
that kind of
we
lives.
were talking about it earlier, and like I also grew up in the Chotanagpur area in Ranchi and Hazaribagh. Those are beautiful areas, and nature is at its best right there. So if we grew up there, I know sustainability is in our blood, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, Chandra. So this is where I was going to. That
uh,
it's interesting, actually, from the origins, from my origins as a childhood. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, how I took dive, a very, a kind of a detour,
mhm.
and through many different paths in the last 25 years of my professional life, over the last 3 decades, how I landed up in environment and in environmental sustainability. Yeah, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right.
exactly. No, I think yeah, I really get it. But you started your career, I think, in the industry, right? In the life science industry. And what made you switch career to academia?
Right, Chandra. So I got very interested in biological sciences and chemistry. So
Hmm.
I got interested, really, in the question of the origin of life, as much as Charles Darwin in his classic book,
Right,
The Origin of Species in 1859, when
right.
he basically disproved the notion that human beings are created in the image of God, but
Hmm.
human beings have evolved from other animals,
Right.
the mammals, from primates, and they have a geographical point of origin, and they have evolved, and we now live in a kind of a in a kind of a civilization which is both causing the huge disruption which we know as climate change as a human species.
Hmm.
Also, we are a species who have the inherent capacity, the exceptional capacity of looking at the crisis that we create from the outside. So I got interested in science very much, possibly being inspired by my father,
Hmm.
in order to basically search for answers to questions that trouble me, that
Hmm.
questions about life, questions about one's existence, and biology to me was the route to go. And I was fortunate to basically go through a Jesuit educational system through St. Xavier's Ranchi and St. Xavier's Calcutta.
Hmm.
Uh, where the Jesuits, as you know, have always been historically very good educators, right? And then I also went to Xavier's Bombay, where I studied life sciences and chemistry. And Xavier's Bombay has been quite a pioneer uh,
Right.
in basically conglomerating biological sciences and chemical sciences under this umbrella called life sciences. And I was fortunate to be one of the earlier batches in the late 80s when I studied there as an undergraduate student. And then I was taught by very good professors, and I got fundamental um, sort of perspectives on how biological molecules essentially
Hmm.
are the cause of life, right? I mean, evolutionary speaking, and also the basis of our existence. And that led me to do a master's degree in molecular biology, the
Okay.
molecules of life.
Right.
In molecular biology, I looked at protein chemistry. Proteins becomes a very important, both a source of sustenance for our entire physiology, because it provides us the enzymes, and also it provides us the antibodies, right? In the age of corona virus, I mean, this is a primary importance to us, because if you're suffering from malnutrition or protein deficiency, which millions of children in our country, in India, suffer from, and all over the world, particularly in the developing world, you don't have the ability to be you're immunocompromised, basically. So that led me to work for the biotechnology life sciences industry,
Right.
for a German multinational who was using protein chemistry to develop a diagnostics called ELISA, enzyme linked immunosorbent assay, in order
Okay.
to basically tag the antigen to infectious bacteria and viruses which are present in the circulating serum and blood, and to basically diagnose very precisely whether patients are positive or negative. Even I mean, with respect to HIV, which was in the late 80s, early 90s, when I joined the industry, that was the biggest scourge facing the world. That was the biggest epidemic facing the world, not the coronavirus.
Exactly.
So I actually joined the life sciences industry in that sector, in the diagnostics, in the molecular diagnostics of infectious and other communicable diseases. So I initially started in the R&D of the company, but then they saw managerial potential in me, so they moved me in Germany in my early years, in my early 20s, to different functions of the company. It was a multinational company. It was a huge multinational company. So I went through research, through production, through quality control, through finance, and then I became one of the first product managers. And I was transferred back from Germany after my management training was over to Bombay, where, along with my colleagues, we started off the diagnostics division of the company. And then for the next 10 years, I would join Sanofi Pasteur. And as you know, the Sanofi Pasteur is one of the world's largest vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's, of course, playing a very important role in the whole coronavirus vaccine production business. So I was the first country manager of the diagnostics division of Sanofi Pasteur for both India and the Middle East, and those were uh, 95, 96, 97. Those were the years when I finally left industry after about a good 10 years. Uh, and
Yeah. What led you to change it to academia?
So, Chandra, as I told you, that I was in the infectious disease diagnostics sector, right? And
Right.
particularly in HIV and hepatitis. And when I was actually starting to lay the foundation of Sanofi Pasteur diagnostics division in India, in Bombay, we used to work in close connection with the blood banks, right? Which basically had to be tested and had to be cleared from HIV and hepatitis, because otherwise you cannot use them in blood banks in order to basically transfuse other patients who need blood. And at that particular point in time, working for a multinational, being privileged to work for a multinational company with very good developed systems, knowledge systems, which we were basically putting in the pathological laboratories in reference hospitals in Bombay, in the blood banks, and across India. I came across this huge divide between people very poor, suffering from HIV, immunocompromised, um, uh, marginal workers like sex workers, right? Intravenous drug users who are very, very poor and who would sort of be professional blood donors, who would come and sort of sit in the outpatient department and basically, selling blood for money, essentially, because of, in order to make make a living wage. And that divide between people who can access healthcare and people who can't access healthcare in a developing country such as India, where the state has traditionally, over the last 20, 30 years been retracting their investment as a percentage of GDP is less than 3%, their contribution to health. So in that divide, that lack of access, I think really started troubling my mind in terms of searching for a career which began on a new page of social responsibility and
Right.
environmental responsibility, So that is what basically led me to fundamentally ask the kind of experiences that I was going through as questions to answer. And I needed to basically go through a systematic program of study and research. And that is where York University, Faculty of Environmental Studies,
Okay.
Canada happened, and I got an offer to do a master's degree there, a kind of a dual master's degree with a focus on business and environment at
Mhm.
the business school, which is called the Schulich School of Business, which is very well known all over the world in sustainability management. And the Faculty of Environmental Studies has been a pioneering environmental program in North America since 1968.
Right.
So that experience that I've just talked to you, that changed me
Mhm.
from a practitioner in industry to becoming gradually and progressively
No,
an academic and
yeah, that's a really interesting story that you said, because a lot of our professionals struggle between becoming a practitioner or an educator, and sometimes they have to take that decision. But tell me, like, you went into sustainability education, and but this is like sustainability is more like a philosophy than science, right? It's like you have various disciplines coming together to provide a holistic worldview. Uh, what works and what does not work in sustainability?
right. Chandra, you're very correct. So even when I was as you know, that my background is I started out as a natural science student,
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
student of biology, a student of science, where when you do experimental science, it's very evidence based, and
Right.
particularly when you do lab based science, the protocols are very black and white. And you don't tolerate things in the gray. I mean,
Mhm.
although there's a lot of things in the gray experimentally, but
Right.
you like to basically construct hypotheses which are completely watertight and evidence based, and then confirm that into facts and theories. So, with that approach, when I started doing my second master's degree in the Faculty of Environmental Studies and
Mhm.
tackling these grand problems, often called grand challenges,
Exactly.
sustainability issues, right? Like problems of climate change, which are
Exactly.
so interlinked between the social and the environmental and the economic aspects of our human civilization, right? Which are so interlinked and so closely sort of dependent on multiple variables. Here you can't make watertight compartments. Here
Right.
you can't sort of construct these very um, solidly empirically grounded
Mhm.
uh, hypothesis and theory, and then convert that into policies and convert it into actionable policies. A
Mhm.
lot of it is in the gray area, right? Because
Right.
also, a lot of the data and a lot of the science is also evolving simultaneously. And here, I had the unique advantage at the Faculty of Environmental Studies because of its interdisciplinary approach of actually taking courses from as varying disciplines as social anthropology,
Mhm.
geography, political science, uh,
Right.
sociology, the science of climate change, atmospheric chemistry, ecology, and stuff like that. So that uh, meshed into my brain into a kind of a new kind of an algorithm, a new kind of a framework
Mhm.
through which to approach these grand challenges and huge issues that the human species has created over the last 150 years of our civilization, right?
No, and like I was talking to you, basically, sometimes defining a problem correctly is more important than the solution itself, right? Basically, there are so many paths of solutions to a single problem in sustainability. So, what is your message to, like, a lot of students are our members on Indian Environment Network? What is your message to students who take up sustainability as a career?
So, in continuation of the question that you asked me, that sustainability, to talking about sustainability or being a professional in the area of sustainability is more, um, I mean, being a philosopher
Exactly.
rather than belonging to a particular kind of professional discipline, being an accountant or being an engineer, which is watertight. So because of the fact that the problems that you're dealing with in the sustainability area, sustainable development sphere, is interlinked and is fluid, and it moves from social to economic to technological to environmental, right? So if any progress that you make economically, it has an externality environmentally, and it has an externality socially, and those kinds of externalities may not be positive, and in
Right.
fact, often they're not positive. So you might develop prosperity, you might create GDP increase, but then immediately you are possibly then causing huge areas of deforestation, because you're occupying the land which was basically under pristine forest cover, and which in an era of climate change with carbon sort of accumulating in the atmosphere, there is the trees, which are the largest sequesters and absorbers of carbon, that you sacrifice with, right?
Right.
And you can't really replace old growth forests once you basically once you've fed it down, right? And then, of course, but on the other hand, the human species is such that, as compared to any other species, although we are 1% of all species living on Earth, we have the unique impact on all species, including ourselves.
Exactly.
And that impact that we have on every aspect of nature it causes these stochastic problems, right? Which basically means that one leads to another, one
Right.
problem leads to another, and you can't anticipate what kind of ripple-off problems are going to be being caused by a particular policy or a particular developmental intervention or a economic intervention that you implement. So in this particular case, my humble suggestion, I don't think I'm in a position to give advice because I'm as much of a student and a learner as much as I am a teacher. But my humble suggestion rather, to members of your society and to students or professionals who are considering to get into the sustainability area, is really, the first thing is an open mind. And second is, irrespective of what disciplines they come from, to have the fluidity to move between one discipline to another discipline, because problems in nature, problems in life, they're not disciplinary bound, right? You
Right.
can't say that there's a physics problem in
Exactly.
life or in the world, or there's a chemistry, or there's a political science problem. You
Right.
can't do that. You have to mix and match different toolkits from different disciplines,
Right.
which are proven to basically work and to make a social, economic, or environmental impact. And that fluidity comes, I think, with personal openness of mind, and
Right.
with also professional dexterity.
Right.
And so, therefore, I think that is perhaps what I was, maybe to a certain extent, naturally blessed with. The fact is, I could change from industry to academia, from academia, from being a practitioner.
Yeah, exactly. You were both a practitioner and then you came to academia, so you understand that, right?
Yeah. So that experience of actually being in the actionable part of the world when you're being in industry, because in industry you can't waste time. You have to quickly translate your ideas into action, and action that also translates into capital, right? Otherwise, if you're working for the private sector, I mean, they don't keep you for very long in the jobs, right?
Right.
So, but then, of course, on the other hand, the advantage of being an academic is you get out of that circle, and you basically then have the unique privilege of looking at the circle, looking at it objectively, when you get out. But if you have been in the circle, if you, like I was, in the center of the machine, so to speak, in the center of a globalized multinational machine,
Right.
you can look at it from outside, and then you can use your experience as raw primary data to to fit in within a kind of a theory, a framework to perhaps develop policies and understand to solve complicated problems.
Amit, you are a Chief Sustainability Officer at Global Jindal University. I usually see only lecturers and professors at a university. How is this role different?
So it's a very interesting role, Chandra. So after my education in Canada for about 18 years, I worked as a professor in the public education sector in Canada, working as a professor in the business school for one of the colleges in the public sector in Ontario, in the province of Ontario in Canada for about 18 years. So that's almost about 2 decades I spent in Canada. And then when I got this opportunity in a new university called Jindal Global University, which has done remarkably well in India in a very short span of time, in about 10 years' time, in a decade, it has become an institute of eminence in the country. It has become a globally ranked university by the QS University World Ranking System. So when I got a job in this university to go back to the country of origin from where I came, from where I got many of the experiences that translate into becoming an environmental and sustainability professional, they actually asked me that, Amit, I mean, you're a hybrid professor. You're a hybrid academic,
Okay.
I mean, you understand industry, you've been in industry, you've developed strategies for multinational companies, and at the same time, you've taught courses on strategy. You understand what kind of externalities companies produce on the environment. So you've designed courses on corporate responsibility and corporate social responsibility, and you've taught that, and you've done applied research with industry. How do we fit you in within the conventional parameters of a university?
Right.
Because because you lack a proper definition of a black and white kind of a role that you can fit in within the university, either your academic staff or your non-academic staff and stuff. So that conversation, I think, when I was reconsidering this change and relocating back to India, that conversation, frankly, developed my job description.
Okay.
And this is a very unconventional designation for an academic like me, who's been for the last 20 years really been an academic. So I'm both an associate professor, cross-appointed between two departments within the university, Jindal Global University. One department is the higher education research and capacity building, and the other one is the latest school called the Jindal School for Environment and Sustainability.
Okay.
And I'm then also the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is a designation which is a designation which in the last 10 years became popular in industry, particularly in manufacturing industry. Which caused a lot of emissions and which guzzled a lot of energy, a lot of water, a lot of resources. So you needed a sustainability officer to basically monitor and measure the impact, the carbon impact, the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and all that of industry. But interestingly, what I'm going to say is a university is a physical organization like any industry. I mean, it has a large number of people living on its campuses. It has got a large consumption of water. It's got a large consumption of energy. So it's got a very important carbon footprint, very significant water footprint. It has a large number of people basically sit down together and eat. So it's got a large footprint of where food is produced, food is consumed, and you know that all these are interlinked activities to climate change.
Right. Exactly.
So even in a university, you need someone to track the impact of the carbon footprint, of the water footprint, of the energy footprint. And as we get into the zero carbonization race, decarbonization race, which is a unique footprint of human civilization, if you can't do it at a university, which churns out and which educates the next generation of young leaders, um, then where will you do the work of sustainability? I think this is the
But it's
first
a very
step.
interesting role because, as you rightly said, that universities are themselves a test lab, right? For everything that we can experiment on sustainability, it's right there. It's like a humongous living organism right there, right? A university, and greening a university, if you don't want to have greenwashing, then the real thing starts from the university campus itself, right?
Absolutely, because if you can actually institute sustainability, the biggest challenge of sustainability, Chandra, in my opinion, and again, humble opinion, is not so much scientific evidence, because we have, I think, enough scientific evidence.
Exactly.
It's not of policy, because we have enough good policy. But I think the biggest challenge of sustainability is human behavior or behavior change.
Exactly.
And if you can inculcate sustainability in spirit, in the letter, in the campus, within young people,
Mhm.
you are now producing a population and releasing the population in the job market, in the world, who are now primed to tackle these grand challenges.
Right.
Because they have sustainability in their blood, how you started off this conversation, you know? So I think the role of universities in sustainable development is absolutely critical and pivotal in accomplishing the sustainable development goals,
No,
because you
I
need
totally get it. Right.
intergenerational equity
Yeah.
from the universe. Yeah, sorry.
No, I said I totally get it because everything, like if we can inculcate that behavior in the students and the teachers and the faculty, and if those students they are going out in the field and doing the same experimentation, that would be an amazing thing to transmit. But tell me, Amit, um, I see a lot of disillusionment among students leaving the forestry and agriculture and sustainability sectors in developing countries and going towards more glamorous IT and financial sector. How can we change that?
Yeah, so Chandra, I think um, I can perhaps approach that complex question that you've asked me, because young people have to look for meaningful careers, right?
Right.
And at one level, although the training that you get in forestry or in agriculture,
Mhm.
nothing can replace it, because you're talking about food production, you're talking about the real connection that you develop in forestry with nature, right?
Mhm.
With biodiversity, right? A part of which we are, and we disrupt as a human species, right? And then that is also, of course, a huge problem, right? That we, in the Anthropocene age, so to speak, a new geological age, that the
Right.
human civilization is created, and we've created this kind of a crisis. But then on the other hand, I mean, we are material creatures, right? We are creatures, who sort of have lifestyle aspirations,
Mhm.
who have aspirations of status, who have aspirations of economic upgradation and social mobility. And,
Right.
and there's nothing wrong with that, because I mean, that's what human dreams. And that is what human achievement and accomplishments are made of, and particularly young people. And that is why they basically go to school, go to educate themselves with those dreams and with those aspirations. So the way that I can approach that is that when I got into this latest research venture of mine, which I called under the framework of ecologies, communities, and markets,
Mhm.
it taught me that we can't basically be anarchists and get rid of markets, but then we can harness the positive sides of markets. And there is a lot of positive sides of markets that we can harness in terms
Right.
of efficiencies that markets have developed, and also in terms of resource utilization
Mhm.
that markets have developed, because a company has to be a very, very efficient resource utilizer of every conceivable kind of resource, right? And companies basically, as conglomerate, make up the market system, right? In its production and distribution and supply chains, and they often sort of causes those externalities. So, people coming out from the agricultural and forestry area with such a fundamental understanding of where those problems actually then are created by
Right.
industry, if they actually then make those connections in how they can set that right, either in policy or back if they work in industry, then they can bring their science and their knowledge in departments and in functions of industry and in companies like sustainability departments or corporate social responsibility departments, where you are now privileged to use a part of the profit money
Mhm.
for social and environmental and economic good.
No, and I like we get a lot of questions, career guidance questions from so many environmental students and everyone in us on Paryavaran.com. And I tell those people and those aspiring environment professionals that you can be in finance and you can still work for the environment sector. You can
Absolutely.
be in the IT and you can develop software for the agriculture and environment sector because you
Ab-
have such keen knowledge of that, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
so you have to understand that linkages because you are having such a ground level understanding of the real problems. Now it's like you can just build upon it, right?
Absolutely. In fact, people coming from honed in agricultural and forestry sciences,
Right.
they can actually develop policies for the government. They can actually make very informed environmental impact assessments for industry.
Mhm.
They can actually work in definitely in IT and develop programs on evaluating ecosystem services, for example. And there are so many different kinds of ways that
Mhm.
whichever profession they choose,
Mhm.
they can I mean, you're very correct. In finance, they can get into social financing, they can get into responsible impact measurement financing.
Exactly.
So many different, so irrespective of what careers they finally end up in,
Mhm.
I think that primordial connection that they develop through
Right.
forestry and agriculture with
Mhm.
the with nature,
Mhm.
which ultimately we are all part of, and which ultimately we are compromising as concomitant, as a byproduct of our industrial
Mhm.
civilization.
No,
So this is where I think those people, those students, can
and
fundamentally contribute to.
no, I'm very fortunate to have you as a mentor on our platform. And anyone, students, professionals who have any questions based on these career choices, you are welcome to ask these questions in the comment sections. Amit would be uh, happy to answer those questions.
Absolutely.
Amit, you talked about linkages between sustainability and markets, right? The recent projects that you're doing. Can you give me a like a current example of how is that linkage happening?
Yeah. So Chandra, my latest project in the environmental space is connecting ecosystems
Mhm.
with communities who are dependent on these ecosystems, mostly poor people, marginal farmers,
Mhm.
and indigenous people,
Mhm.
and markets, connecting the communities with the markets for livelihood. So essentially, I call this framework ecologies, communities, and markets.
Okay.
I developed this framework based on my research along with an NGO
Mhm.
called Applied Environmental Research Foundation, based out of Pune, which
Mhm.
recently celebrated in August 2020 their 25th anniversary.
Okay.
And I happened to visit, I was invited by AERF to go and visit two of their field sites in Sangameshwar and Bhimashankar in northern Western Ghats.
Mhm.
And to understand the kind of community based conservation work they're doing by developing livelihood models for the communities who are dependent most on the ecosystem services. And of course, as you know, that the Western Ghats is a threatened ecosystem, and
Right.
it's been classified as a threatened ecosystem or a biodiversity hotspot by a very well-known organization called Conservation International.
Okay.
In the 1980s, they came up with a term biodiversity hotspot, where less than 30% of the endemic, of the species that you can only find within a particular ecosystem, if less than 30% of the species you see, then it becomes a kind of a threatened ecosystem. And there are 34 or 35 such biodiversity hotspots all across the world. But although these biodiversity hotspots occupy less than 2.5% of the Earth's surface area, but they contribute a staggering 45% of the Earth's biodiversity. So you can imagine the importance, because if you don't have biodiversity, you don't have food production, you don't have seed varieties, you don't have crop varieties, you don't have food security. Without food security, the entire edifice of the industrial civilization will collapse. And without and biodiversity can't originate without these old forests, old growth forests, which are basically the sites of conservation for AERF. So when I went there, um, um, I got exposed for the first time the linkages between critical ecosystems and threatened ecosystems, and why communities basically who own private forests, private lands, like about more than 30,000 acres in the northern Western Ghats, are owned by
Right.
by the local forested lands and areas to timber merchants, to industries, because the agricultural productivity is falling, right? I mean, they can't put food on the table. They can't earn a living wage to put their children and meet their aspirations and dreams. And they become migrant workers in Pune and and Bombay, and they become security guards or cab drivers, and they become part of the slum population, right? Leaving their absolutely pristine natural ecosystem and living in these densely populated cities. So here, this happens because there are not imaginative livelihood models to keep these communities, to keep their forests intact, and to keep them as guardians of the forests that they have been guardians of for hundreds of generations.
Right.
What this organization, AERF, uniquely does is that in India is a religious country, and it's also religion in India often is connected to nature. So there are these, divine sacred spots
Mm.
called sacred
It grows, right?
groves and sacred forests, and they're not just confined to India. They're all over. They're all over. They're in Latin America. They're in Africa, and in all ancient civilizations, you'll find sacred groves. And in Western Ghats, I mean, there are more than about 2,500 sacred groves just in India alone. And in
Yeah.
Western Ghats, are scattered all across. These sacred groves, these like Shiva temples, ancient Shiva temples, for example, the one that you find in Bhimashankar, has
Yes.
been a natural point of conservation where you can actually observe the endemic species being conserved. Because these are sacred groves, these are because this is where the deities are. Because people worship, people don't usually fell down the trees and then cut down the groves and destroy it, mercilessly. So through the institution, or through the art tool of sacred groves, this becomes then a very important researcher for conservation scientists and conservationists and conservation NGOs to document the endemic species, and to
Yeah.
basically then compare it how in the rest of the Western Ghats, for example, as a threatened ecosystem, biodiversity loss and depletion is happening. And then, in order to basically, after collecting that evidence, if you can then convert that evidence into a storytelling format and spread that awareness within the community, that this is what is happening to their own resources. And then within that storytelling, if you can identify trees like Bibitaki and Haritaki, which basically contribute to triphala, which is a natural gastrointestinal digestive, which are demanded by multinational companies like Unilever. Pakka Herbs, for example, is a tea company in the UK, which Unilever has bought over recently. And Pakka Herbs gets triphala. the components of triphala in the tea bags, and they supply the tea bags through the global supply chain of Unilever to all over the world, right? I mean, on that promise of the brand that basically when you're sipping this tea in the rich markets, North America and Europe, you're basically getting all these intestinal remedial herbs
Right.
in pristine forests. And then for that, they are willing to give a conservation premium as part of their pricing model to the communities. If you can teach them livelihood models of sustainably harvesting bibitaki and haritaki, and make that into triphala components, package it, make it value added, and put it in the supply chain, in the demand side, in the supply side rather, of these multinational companies, right?
No,
So
I think you put it really well, how the linkages happen in just like in a short story form right here. And I'm very excited about it. I have been talking about it. We also, when I was doing my MBA from Indian Institute of Forest Management, I worked 2 months in Chota Nagpur area and documenting the same village forests where people were themselves protecting these forests. And there were so many livelihood options that they were dependent on all the minor forest products, right? And if we can link these things that people are doing to the broader market, I'm sure the livelihood options would become 10 times as big or 100 times as big, right?
right, Chandra. So therefore, this is a sustainable livelihood model that you can develop based on non-timber forest products.
Right.
And you can also help transform multinational companies or even large Indian companies, which buy natural,
Exactly.
forest-based products, in to transform the supply chain into sustainable supply chains.
Exactly.
Right? And they can do a sustainable chain analysis, which is a proven tool for supply chain professionals, where they can actually audit the kind of carbon footprint as
Exactly.
products move from one point in the supply chain to another point in the supply
Right.
chain, and the impact that you can actually create through sustainable pricing or fair trade pricing of these herb-based or nature-based products, which can be transferred to these communities who are then harnessing these products. If it's fairly priced products, then it gives them the livelihoods to remain and to become the protectors and the guardian angels of the forest that they've always been.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give them that disincentive then to leave their land and to become migrant workers.
Yeah, this is a big topic in itself, and I hope we can just arrange a series of webinars just focused on this subject. And I think it will certainly work together to popularize it on a platform and showcase those various models and examples. And we can just bring it together on our paryavaran.com platform. That would be huge. So I'll be happy to work with you on it, but we don't have much time here. So let me just ask you just one question. How has this working for sustainability changed you as a person, and what do you want to have as your legacy?
So, Chandra, I'm still evolving. I still consider myself a student of life. I'm constantly learning, and out of the 3 decades or so that I've been professionally working, 10 years in industry and 20 years in academia, I think this sustainability has changed me into a much better human being. Into a human being who is proactively trying to reduce one's consumption needs, to live with little and to consume little. And this is also the kind of conversation that I have with my daughter.
Right.
That when you have a computer, I've got a 12-year-old daughter who's a great who's a great environmentalist, I think, in the
Oh,
media.
wow.
So we take so before I went off, relocated to several years back when I was doing my master's degree at York University in environmental studies, I made a conscious decision to sell my car. and ever since then, I've never had a car.
Oh, wow.
And every time I've had a personal argument with my wife, who has desired a car, I use my daughter as my biggest advocate, who supports me in the fact that we should reduce our personal carbon footprint. So we still drive cars, we still rent a car, So every time we need a car, we rent a car, and we are part of a rental car community. And every time I come to Toronto, I'm part of the Zip car community. We bike, and so therefore, I think this made a much better person to reflect, and to also, when you go to these forested areas, you also live, when you're a field researcher, you
Right.
live with very poor people, and you see, for example, that if they are human beings made of the same flesh and blood, if they can live with such little money, like you and I grew up in Chotanagpur, in these tribal areas,
Exactly.
who are tribals, right? And you see that they are so naturally innovative, that living with such scarce resources, but yet the food that they cook in their home is so hygienic, it's so clean, it's so good quality. I mean, I still remember those tastes, from my friends, who were in the villages in Ranchi, who used to be friends, who used to play cricket with. So the legacy, if there's any legacy that I can leave behind at all, is, I think, the combination of science, the combination of education, the combination of a versatile open mind, and this forging of connections with the community, the larger community, and doing something to share the benefits of the privileged education, the privileged background that we have to access educational resources with people who can't, and to help them develop their own developmental model, and to help conserve nature. So that is, frankly, the kind of legacy, and to learn to live with less, and to learn to live with less, and to change one's behavior. Uh,
No,
so
yeah,
that's
very aptly said, Amit. We have so many more things to cover, but we'll perhaps do another session and perhaps just work together and do like a monthly mentorship session for this future professionals whose heavy soldiers lie the burden of taking our sustainability forward. So thank you for coming to the show, Amit. Again, all those watching this show and who will be watching this video, if you have any questions, just put it in the comments section, and Amit would be very happy to answer your questions. So thank you, Amit.
Thank you very much, Chandra, for giving me this opportunity to share my story with you and the larger network of Paryavaran. And I'd be very happy to work with you and to be part of Paryavaran, and to be of any kind of help and assistance to any of your members, and beyond, in a humble way that I can be of help. Thank you. Thank you.